Hey, so this is going to be kind of a philosophy video, and gonna try and ponder the answer to the question of whether time has a beginning, and maybe in this video, maybe in another video, I'll also discuss the question of whether time has an end, which I think both of them are pretty interesting questions that, considering we um, only exist within time, we don't actually have an answer to either of one of them, but I think science talks a lot about the beginning of time, and I think because of that, it will be a little bit easier to talk about that. But the end of time is also very interesting because there's plenty of people who have talked about that too. But but yeah, the I think what I'll start with talking about the beginning of time is thinking about the life of a single person, because really from our first hand perspective, our life, the time which occupies our life is all we really directly perceive. And you could think that, in the present moment, you feel time passing. You see things around you changing. You feel like you have this thing that happens, like you eat breakfast and then you spend some time doing stuff, and then you eat lunch, that type of thing. But you can very easily imagine the things that happened yesterday or the things that happened last week. And it is very clear that there was time that passed between, right now and what happened in the past. And you can keep doing that, years back, decades back, however long you've lived. And even if the further back you go, the fewer memories you have, you still have a very clear idea that that time has passed and that there are things that happened longer ago and things that happened more recently. But then you get to whatever point in your life where you can't continue remembering things, and you don't feel like you can perceive the time that passed before you were born. But then you can move on to the stories that you've been told, from your parents or from um, just like society, I guess. That there's all sorts of information that happened, all sorts of stories about things that happened before you were born, like your parents getting married or your grandparents, their life, that type of thing. But you also have the stories of society, of history, where you have like the Industrial Revolution and the um, people coming to America, that sort of thing. And all of these things are outside of your lifespan, but you very clearly know that there is a chronological history to things. That there are some things that happened more recently, some things that happened longer ago, and so it follows the same template as your life, even though you didn't directly experience those things. You've just heard the stories about them and kind of infer from your intuition of your own life that these things follow a similar pattern. And so before I go further into considering like longer and longer time spans, which you can kind of do that as like just considering considering the limits of human knowledge, I guess. I just want to think about comparing the individual lifespan to the lifespan of a society and that type of thing, and seeing that within your own life, you could you could kind of say that time didn't necessarily begin when you were born, because you know that there was time passing before you were born for hundreds and thousands of years. But it's more like time went from being outside of your life to suddenly, when you're born, being something that happens within your life. And it's not like it's like from time being an external phenomenon, it becomes an internal phenomenon, where it's now something that you actually experience, and it's almost as though time is passing within you rather than time passing from some outside perspective, from like in some outside world that you don't know about, in an outside world that you can only hear stories about. And so this, hmm, yeah. So the key, and I think the key to seeing what I'm saying here with this kind of transition between or time being external before your life and internal during your life, is seeing the way that time, the way that things, hmm, yeah, it's kind of seeing that time as a physical process hasn't changed because there's still a progression happening where a society 1,000 years ago changes from 1,000 years to 900 years in the same way that your life changes from year to year. But the difference is that you can only hear stories and snippets of the past that happened before you were born. But within your own life, you experience every single moment of time. And even if your memory doesn't keep track of every moment like that, and in a lot of ways, your memory is very much like the history of society, where you only really remember some parts of your life. The key difference is that you actually did experience every part of that time. Like every part of your life, when you say if you remember 5 years ago, you maybe don't remember everything that happened, but there's a certain part of you that knows that you actually did experience every single moment of that. So there's no actual gaps in your. It's like your past experience didn't have any gaps of time, whereas your knowledge of the past in society that happened 1,000 years ago, that does have gaps, and it's inevitably going to have gaps because there's no one actually alive that experienced what happened, every single moment of that. Mm. Ooh, wow. That's the wind closing the gate. Um, hmm. But yeah, I don't know if I've quite made a sufficient argument for what I'm going to get to next. But assuming assuming you agree with what I've said so far, I want to extend that to the idea of the time span of the universe, because science talks about the Big Bang and the concept that at some point, some billions of years ago, there is essentially the beginning of the universe, where on one side of this event, the universe has existed, and that at some point during it, the Earth was formed and humanity eventually came to exist. But before that, there was kind of it's like there's no scientific theories that explain what happened before that. And so if you assume that science is the only thing that can identify time as existing, then the fact that there's no science about it means that there was no time before that. But the reason this is worth talking about is that there's so many paradoxes that get introduced when you say something like that. Because how can there be something that happens before time when before and after is something that you can't separate from the concept of time? It's like there's no, but before, without time existing, there is no before and there is no after. So in order to have something before time, time itself has to be present before and after that event. And so what I've kind of been portraying with the idea of the life of an individual having a chronology and the life of a society having a chronology is to kind of introduce the idea that the universe from the point of the Big Bang has a sequence of time in the same way that an individual person's life has that sequence of time. And you can kind of say that the memory of the universe, if that could possibly exist, that memory has kept track of everything that happens from the Big Bang to the present moment. and there's been no gaps where the universe has existed that whole time. But it's almost as though before the Big Bang is like before you were born, and that somehow, even though the universe can't keep track of the moments that have happened before it existed, in theory there could be some type of to really keep the analogy going, there could be some type of stories that get past essentially over the barrier of the Big Bang, where there was some sort of universe before, and somehow the universe that exists now can get information from before the before the beginning of the universe, and through that it can be shown that there is some type of time that happened before, and it would be a different type of time. It wouldn't be something that the physical world, that the physical universe could have experienced directly. It would have to be something that can only be known in small snippets and small, small pieces of history that could be pieced together into to some. You can kind of infer that time used to exist before the universe, but it would always be within the realm of history. From the perspective of a person, the history of their society versus the actual experience of their life. And if this holds any relevance at all, I guess, then it would be that it's not so much that time started with the Big Bang and didn't exist at all before. It's more that time changed the way it works at the Big Bang from some universe that we can never actually experience directly to all of a sudden a universe that follows the laws of time that we, billions of years later still experience today. You could say that we can trace time back to the beginning of the universe, and through that kind of inference, we can assume that time has always worked the same way throughout the whole life of the universe. But before that, there's no solid ground we can actually put these time landmarks on to say that time necessarily worked the same way. But in the same way that in our life we have our personal memories, and before our life we have historical memories, it could be that before the universe, we could find some type of, like I don't know what you'd even call it, but some type of landmark that would take a form that we don't recognize quite yet, but would actually give us evidence that time didn't actually begin with the Big Bang, that it was actually present before that. Excuse me. Hmm. Whew. But but yeah, I guess that's like the main crux of my philosophical argument here is it's kind of saying that we can imagine a we can imagine time outside of our own life. So through that same thinking process, we can imagine time outside of our own universe. But this doesn't actually answer the question of whether time had a beginning, because all this really does is move back the beginning of time from beginning with the Big Bang to beginning sometime before that. But I yeah, I guess I think I'll kind of leave it there for this video. I don't have too much more meaningful to say about it, but I'll at least mention that the Eastern philosophies in was like the Vedanta, kind of like the ancient stories that predate Hinduism and Buddhism. They they describe a universe that goes through cycles where there's kind of a forming and then dissolution of the universe, where you could consider the Big Bang as like the formation of a universe, and then sometime in the future there would be a dissolution where the universe kind of goes back to being extremely simple, and from that extremely simple state, eventually there's another Big Bang that starts not actually new universe, but a new cycle of the universe, which I think there are scientific um, hypotheses. I don't think it's probably not in the realm of actual scientific theory, but there are people considering that idea in science, and I think it's something very hard to prove and to actually have evidence of, because it's like it's essentially talking about things that are so far in the past or so far in the future that we have very little reference for them. But I I think it's worth at least considering that there really is no beginning to time, and that through some type of reality that is a part of the universe and doesn't it's like there's something that doesn't get destroyed with the Big Bang or with the ending of the universe. It's like there's some type of thing that is constant throughout those cycles, where no matter how many billions and trillions of years you go back, there is still some continuous uh you can say like a thread of causality, some thread of time that exists over unimaginable time spans, and is essentially separate from the physical world, such that nothing the beginning and ending of a universe has no effect on that continual process of time. And if that's the case, then it would really be that time has no beginning. Ooh, wow. Hawk hawk flying overhead. Um, but it would be that there's essentially no event. There's no physical event that could begin time or end time. If time is something that um, is fundamentally non-physical. But that just gets back to the paradox, the challenge of it, because as physical beings, we can never really imagine time or anything else being truly non-physical, because all of the references we have and all the ways that we understand things are physical, physical, like on a physical basis of assuming things are are tangible and are discrete in the way that physical things are, and that if time cannot be created or destroyed in this way, that it survives the end of a universe. We couldn't really know that unless we ourselves could could survive, between cycles of universes, and find the end of it and the beginning of it and see that the time was there the whole time. But yeah, I think that sums it up. That's pretty much the limit of this type of philosophy, is getting back to the initial paradox that we can't actually know the answer to a question like this, but but yeah, even if we never know the answer, there's always fun things to say about any question. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and peace.